If the Amazon rainforest could talk, it would say 2 words. Help me. Pretty close, but that's not quite right. Fossil fuels. Yeah, that sounds more like it. Fossil fuels are 2 relatively simple words, but they've been associated with something a lot more complicated: environmental destruction. But are fossil fuels really the bad guys here? Back in the day, they helped humanity flourish by contributing to the Industrial Revolution. They also gave us electricity and advanced our technological achievements, but more on that later. Whether or not that's the case, the impact that fossil fuels have had is undeniable. In fact, they were so groundbreaking that there was a whole period in Earth's history named after them, and it spanned 60 million years. The Carboniferous period. 350 million years ago, the Earth looked vastly different. Instead of our familiar 7 continents, the humble beginnings of something big were on the horizon. During the Carboniferous period, the Earth was split into 2 supercontinents, Laurasia at the north and Gondwana at the south. The Earth was going through a lot of changes at the time, and the tectonic plates were shifting. Gondwana was thus starting to move up towards Laurasia until the 2 continents collided in an earth-shattering phenomenon. Well, the Earth didn't shatter per se, but this collision did mark the dawn of Pangaea. Pangaea was one hefty supercontinent, a massive landmass smack dab in the middle of the Earth, surrounded by vast oceans stretching into oblivion. The first signs of life were also starting to emerge, and the arid plains were replaced by swaths of greenery. Lush forests and murky swamps blossomed out of the earth, with trees as tall as... I don't actually know, because these trees no longer exist. All I can say is that they were remarkably tall, according to my sources. There were so many of them that the oxygen in the atmosphere was at 35%, compared to today's 21%. This, however, didn't come without its consequences. Dragonflies the size of dogs buzzed about, with gargantuan cockroaches to keep them company. Poisonous centipedes grew up to 2 meters in length, their segmented bodies undulating with the sheer force of lugging their own weight around. What's more, this period in time was also known as the Age of Amphibians. Some of the amphibians that lived during the Carboniferous period looked like crocodiles, except they were much worse. I shudder to think what life would be like right now if they still roamed the lands. Thankfully, they all died out eventually. The remains of these monstrous plants and animals sunk below the murky surface of the swamps, where they became trapped under immense heat and pressure for millions of years. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how our first fossil fuel was born: coal. In fact, the word carboniferous itself means coal-bearing. But I know what you're thinking. What about the dinosaurs? It's a common misconception that fossil fuel reserves developed from the remains of dinosaurs, but the Carboniferous period happened 100 million years before the dinosaurs ever even existed. Now let's fast forward a few million years later to the present day. There are still no flying cars, but we do have electric cars. I'm sure if the dinosaurs could think, they wouldn't have been able to fathom such an invention. In fact, even I have a hard time understanding green energy sometimes, but I'm yet to decide if fossil fuels are the bad guys. Dr. Mohammed Al Breiki has therefore kindly agreed to talk to me about fossil fuels and green energy. Dr. Mohammed has a doctorate in sustainable energy from Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. Let's unpack his thoughts about fossil fuels.
There are some issues when it comes to utilizing fossil fuels. So as much as we utilize fossil fuels, these fossil fuels emit so much emissions. Those emissions have environmental concerns, and it affects us as a human. So I really want to highlight 3 major aspects when it comes to environmental concerns. The first one is air pollution. Burning fossil fuels release a variety of pollutants into the atmosphere. As we know that fossil fuels are the largest source of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases. And lastly, health impact. Do you know that people who live in cities that are polluted are more likely to get sick comparing to people who do not live in cities?
Hold on a second. Before we jump into all the negatives, it's only fair to shed light on all the positives that fossil fuels offered us too. To say that fossil fuels underwrite practically every good, service, and activity in the contemporary world would not be an exaggeration, and it all began with the Industrial Revolution in the year 1760. Imagine with me that you're a peasant farmer living in the outskirts of England in the 18th century. You live life in perpetual fear of leaving your house, lest another plague, little ice age, or war breaks out on your doorstep. But you have to leave your house to cultivate wheat, make gruel, and provide sustenance for your family, most of whom wouldn't even live to see their 21st birthday. And then one day, trade happens. Potatoes, maize, and even chocolate are suddenly available for consumption. With more calorie-dense foods, people are suddenly able to live longer. They have more time, arguably the most precious resource known to man. So the people tinkered and experimented and made inventions with all their free time. Small improvements to machinery came at a steady pace. Eventually, all these small improvements piled up and made one big change. Machinery was now advanced enough to be used in factories, and they were powered using none other than coal, the star fossil fuel of the Industrial Revolution. Labor was now faster, more efficient. The textiles industry gave us new styles of clothing, and steam engines enabled us to travel outside of our hometowns. The output of countries greatly increased, and humanity thrived. More money, more people, and just all around more happiness. Well, more happiness to everyone except the laborers, who were mostly children that suffered death and disfigurement at the hands of the machines. But that's a story for another time. But maybe, just maybe, fossil fuels aren't the bad guys. Perhaps they're more like the misunderstood anti-hero who lacks conventional heroic qualities, but still ends up doing something good, only to sort of ruin it. Because even though it was coal that fueled all these developments, what with all these environmental and health concerns, it's no wonder we're scurrying to find substitutes for fossil fuels.
I just want to say that we actually don't need substitute for these fuels.
Wait, what?
We need clean fuels. I mean, we can use our fossil fuels that we are using today. However, we just need to make these fuels clean. What do I mean by clean? Making the emissions, or basically capturing the emissions while combusting these fuels. So our study proposed producing these fuels and utilizing these fuels in a more environmental way comparing to the current fossil fuels.
What Dr. Mohammed is trying to say is that there's a way to remove all the bad parts of fossil fuels without completely abandoning them. Traditionally, when fossil fuels are burned, they release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, meaning that it's one of the biggest contributors to global warming. If we can find ways to make fossil fuels cleaner, we could have our cake and eat it too. Or rather, have our energy and save the planet too. But the million-dollar question is, how do you clean up fossil fuels?
In simple words, we studied two fuels. These fuels are hydrogen and methane. I mean, we all have heard about hydrogen currently, and Oman is investing so much in hydrogen. And about methane is basically natural gas. It's a component in natural gas. So we studied the production of these two fuels, and then we evaluate these two fuels from different dimensions. Technologies, is the technologies available to produce these fuels? Is our infrastructure ready to adapt these fuels? And when I talk about the production, we know that there is traditional way for producing these fuels and renewable way for producing these fuels. And our study or our research focus on the renewable production of these two fuels.
Hydrogen is widely hailed as the cleanest fuel in the world. It only emits water vapor and leaves no residue in the air, unlike coal or oil. In fact, hydrogen has been used since the beginning of the 19th century in cars and ships, and has even powered homes and industry. Green methane is also a great sustainable alternative to fossil fuels. But what really stood out to me about green methane is that it's made of poultry manure. So let me get my facts straight. Cow farts are among the largest contributors to climate change, but chicken poo is good for the environment. I'm not qualified to question the science behind this, so I'm just telling it like it is. Do with that information what you will. But with all these moves towards clean energy and sustainable alternatives, I was curious to know what might happen if we were to wake up one day and learn that our fossil fuel reserves have run out.
Wow. Hopefully this day will not come. However, honestly speaking, if we were to find ourselves in a world without fossil fuels, you know what, let me first mention some of the energy crises that will happen. First of all, electricity shortage. I mean, we will not be able to continue the school if fossil fuel disappears. Transportation, we will not be able to drive our cars or fly to other countries. Heating and cooling, for example, in the summer we will not be able to turn on our air conditioning. Currently, our energy system depends heavily on fossil fuels. There are some plans to adapt renewables, but we are a bit behind. I mean, if today fossil fuels are not there anymore, we will suffer. And we will also have economic impact. Here we're talking about global economy disruption. We will lose a lot of jobs and there will be price inflation. However, my advice will be we will need to adapt to renewables. Currently, we are using fossil fuels heavily, and we know that fossil fuels are not sustainable. So we will need to have strategic moves and more rapid shift toward renewables.
Sounds terrifying, but we've still got a little more time on our hands to fix this. Fossil fuel reserves might still last us up to 100 more years, give or take a few. But of course, this number will largely depend on how each country continues to consume fossil fuels, so take this number with a pinch of salt. The good thing is that we're already beginning to see a worldwide shift towards clean energy sources, powering a safer future for coming generations. This was Sara Lawati on 90.4 Oman FM.